Ladies, gentlemen, and Harajam of all ages, with the release of Season 5 for Diablo 4, there have been a number of additions to the Eternal version of this game. Things that aren't only around for the season, but forever. That said, one of the more important season-specific things that was added in, as it was last season, is the reputation track. This was introduced in Season 4 as a concept of the way for the devs to just sort of give us loads of items, equipment, materials, based on a relatively consistent measure of playing the game, in the season specifically. The more you dig into the game, the more efficient that you are at getting this reputation, and the more rep you get as a result, and the more boosted you can be by the gear that you get from the rep if you get it early. I got my first unique from these super early on this season. There is a box guaranteed to give it to you that you can get extremely easily, and this takes very little effort to actually unlock to begin with. The best part, unlike last season where the only place that you could farm the reputation was Helltide, now you get it from everywhere in the game. It is essentially just a counter on a material that drops from an enemy above a normal monster, meaning that this includes things like champions, which are the ones that boost defense of nearby allies. It includes your standard elites, it includes Hellborn, and it especially includes any sort of boss, as they drop far more of this material than anything else. That said, because this is now something that you can basically farm by doing anything in the game, that means that the obvious way to farm the reputation is no longer as clear as it was before. And while a lot of people will enjoy that you can just sort of passively get reputation by doing any activity that you want, I know there are others who will just sort of want to zoom to the end of the reputation track as quickly as possible for the strong gear from the boxes, and especially the free guaranteed resplendent spark, which is a portion of your own chosen mythic unique at the very end of the reputation track. Not to mention that you actually unlock parts of the seasonal questline through reputation this season. So today we're going to simply go through the different methods of most effectively farming this new reputation, and for a bit of a spoiler, it's actually a really big difference between even the second best and the best methods, but it does sort of change as you level. World Tier 1 and 2, the best source of these is specifically from the Blood Maiden event in Helltide. The reason for this is that not only does the Blood Maiden herself count as a boss, but elites that are spawned during the build-up to this boss entering also count as elites, of course, so they drop a bunch of rep, and the Hellborn disciples that show up as part of the boss fight as well also count as elites for the purpose of these drops. So to put it simply, the goal of farming this reputation is simply to find the highest density of elites and bosses over time, and this accomplishes that incredibly. That said, obviously the hearts required to spawn the Blood Maiden aren't in quite that high supply during the start of the season, even with it only requiring 2 now in the first 2 world tiers. And so the best way to actually do this without a cost in early world tiers is the new Hellsbreach Dungeons, which have a surprising amount of elite density for the actual type of activity that they are. That said, these only really work for world tier 1 and 2, and they are a fair amount worse than Blood Maidens, and honestly they will slow down your XP farming compared to other activities enough that I wouldn't really recommend spending too much time in them outside of just the actual quests from the season itself. That said, your farming will speed up very rapidly once you enter World Tier 3 and World Tier 4, of course. Helltide Blood Maidens are still good in these, in fact even better than they were before, mostly because the amount of rep that you get from each enemy type actually seems to scale with the monster level, increasing in each world tier, and then seemingly also increasing for enemies that are above level 100 later on. That said, Blood Maidens are very good, but now we also have Nightmare Dungeons as an option, and these are worse than Blood Maidens, at least in World Tier 3, we'll talk about World Tier 4 in a moment, but they are better than Hellsbreach Dungeons pretty undeniably, so it sort of kicks those out completely from this conversation, but they also sort of become irrelevant to the conversation of specifically wanting to farm reputation once we start talking about the big new activity this season, the Infernal Hordes, which you can start to access in World Tier 3. This activity, especially with the changes done to spawn rates since the PTR, is just sort of a wet dream of enemy density. The experience rewards are incredible, the spawns are relentless in the best of ways, there's an incredibly high number of elites, and you can make choices through the upgrades between waves to not only add more elites to spawn in, or Hellborn spawns, things like that, you can even add in Aether Lords if you get lucky. These count as full-on bosses for most purposes in the game, including dropping a boss worth of reputation on every kill. Once you have the upgrade, you tend to get at least 1 or even 2 per wave, and if you get it on an early wave, that is essentially 1 to 2 full-on bosses per minute for the rest of your time in that specific activity, even aside from the massive amount of elites that you get from this as well, and then you get a big pop from the actual proper boss at the end of the Infernal Hordes as well. The more specific testing then I actually did in World Tier 4 around level 80, Helltide was still relatively solid, but even Blood Maidens start to fall behind Nightmare Dungeons once you can do them at higher ranges in World Tier 4 just due to density increases, as well as the increased value of fighting higher level monsters, especially if you can fight ones above level 100 in Nightmare Dungeons. Not to mention this doubling up with glyph experience farming for your Paragon as well, which is a very important start of the start of season grind as well. That said, it becomes even more clear though the difference between dungeons and hordes in World Tier 4, with a Nightmare Dungeon at tier 55, so enemies just over level 100, giving me around 3,000 reputation from start to finish. It was Champion's Demise as well, it's worth mentioning, so it's actually a really nice, long, juicy one with lots of elites and a boss at the end, but this just paled fully in comparison to a tier 3 Infernal Horde, which I chose specifically to compare due to similar monster level to that Nightmare Dungeon. A single tier 3 Infernal Horde gave me around 16,000 reputation points, which at my progression level was the last 15% or so of one level, a full level after that, and then the first 15% or so of the next tier after that too. So basically a level and a third. You could say this was a bit of a big difference from Nightmare Dungeons, and so it's quite clear once you've actually done the legwork and the testing that Infernal Hordes are just far and away the best way to farm this reputation, especially if you lean on spawning bonus elites and Aetherlord bosses in your waves too. That said, there is one further consideration to this as well, which is that Infernal Horde tier 2 is less valuable than Nightmare Dungeons that have monsters in them from basically level 85 to 100, because they're much easier to complete than tier 3 of the Infernal Horde. Infernal Horde is just harder than fighting normal monsters of that level and other content, and so doing so will take a little bit more time than getting to higher level Nightmare Dungeons, and so you might have to consider that a little bit, but again, the difference is so big that even tier 2 is quite valuable. You just won't want to do those anymore for experience farming, obviously, once you're above level 75, because that's where they sit. But if you only care about rep, it's still just hordes all the way. One last note then, we talked about the sheer quality of the rewards, giving tons of different legendary aspects, greater FX gear even in later boxes, and even early uniques in the early boxes. It should be mentioned as well though, that unlike some other drops in the game, these don't change quality based on the level and world tier you are when you get them. The reputation rewards are set at that point that they are. So if you are wondering if you should delay getting these boxes or something like that, it's actually the opposite. The earlier that you get the reputation rewards, the better they will be for your leveling journey in comparison. I would generally just recommend going full gas on getting these rewards. They're really good, especially with how well it overlaps with just leveling grinds and equipment grinds too. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Your guide to the reputation system in Season 5 and how best to farm up that reputation quickly, because it also even gets you more parts of the seasonal questline too, which, while not all that involved or rewarding in itself, maybe as far as power, does give you access to Hellsbreach Dungeons and also just sort of training wheels you into the Infernal Horde mechanics before you are in the new activity itself properly. All that said, the end result is quite simple. Infernal Hordes are the answer to this question, and it's definitely worth grabbing the unlocks as you get them without much of a doubt. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and hopefully it helps you out on your own leveling journey in the season. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.